Rochana has been a speaker to us on a couple of occasions in the past, so most of you would know who she is. I think her parents are here as well. I won't be asking all the questions which I have asked from you before, Rochana, like where you are from, what you're doing, etc. Let's stick to the presentation today. So you're going to talk about cricket, and it's probably, I may be wrong, but still, it's at least in Sri Lanka, it's a majority male dominant sport. Yes, I know that there is a Sri Lankan team who has done very well, but it's only emerging now. So, what made you interested in cricket?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. I always enjoy the SLLS presentations, and I always enjoy the banter that goes on in the WhatsApp groups as well. So I'm very much part of this group, and I enjoy being part of this group. So thank you very much for having me here. So regarding my interest in cricket, I think like a lot of people, I grew up with cricket, and I have a cricket crazy father. So he watches matches, he watches every single match every single day. So that's how I got interested in cricket. But for me, more than the sport itself, I'm more interested in the spectatorship of the sport. So I observe the fans. I myself am a fan, and I like observing myself and other fans, and that's how I got interested in cricket. And this whole topic was almost a bit of an accident, I would say. In 2022, when we won the Asia Cup, this was after, severe economic tensions in the country. And it was like this big thing to win the Asia Cup in 2022. And then I started to see how people reacted on social media. I mean, that is something I had always observed from before as well, but I started to get this new interest in sort of observing how people reacted to cricket and to Sri Lankan cricket in particular. And then I decided to take this a bit further, make it an academic interest, and then I ended up pursuing my master's degree, my master's research in Sri Lankan cricket literature. So my master's degree was in world literature. So then I decided to look at Sri Lankan cricket literature. And in that process, I also looked at Caribbean literature, Caribbean cricket literature. Then, of course, English cricket literature was also part of it. And then, so that was the foundation for my current interest in cricket.
Thank you about that. And just enlighten us, with which university did you completed your master's?
I did it at Oxford. I was part of the Faculty of English, and my master's was in world literature.
Okay, and that was your specialty even in Sri Lanka, I believe. Is that right?
No.
English.
English, yes.
Yes. And what were you doing in Sri Lanka with regards to that? Before coming here, you were a lecturer, weren't you?
Yes, so I did English at at Peradeniya University, and then afterwards I was a temporary lecturer at the department, and then it was after that that I came to Oxford for my master's.
And you will be going back, I presume, because you told me that you don't want to stay here.
Yes, I'd like to go back. Yes, I'd like to ideally join Peradeniya again.
Back to Peradeniya. So I think Peradeniya is waiting until you come back to give you a position there, I suppose. So we talked about that, but your interest in cricket, today's presentation, you're going to do two things, to kill two birds in one stone. With one stone. So I think you're preparing for your doctorate as well. And what's the topic you're going to use for your doctorate?
Yes. So that project is on post-1948 Sri Lankan cricket in the UK. So I'm looking at the different waves of migration and how they have interacted with cricket and how they have brought the Sri Lankan variety of cricket to the UK. I mean, obviously, it's a British sport. It was introduced during the British colonial rule. But then in Sri Lanka, we have made cricket our own vernacular. We have our own distinct way of playing cricket and interacting with cricket. So especially with the big match tradition in Sri Lanka as well, we have this very iconic schoolboy cricketing culture that we have brought back to the UK. So it's along those lines that I'm sort of, pursuing my doctorate. Yeah, we're hoping to pursue my doctorate.
Thank you. And while doing all of those, I believe you have some connection to the Oxford English Dictionary. Could you let us know what that is?
Yes. So I'm primarily a linguist literature person. So during my master's degree, I did a term paper on Sri Lankan origin words in the Oxford English Dictionary, and that led to my appointment as the Sri Lankan English consultant to the Oxford English Dictionary. So I'm currently in the process of drafting some words to be added to the dictionary, and also editing the already existing entries. For example, the word kurakan is in the dictionary, but the definition given to it is a type of grain eaten by the poor people of Ceylon. But obviously, that's a very outdated definition. So part of my role is to look carefully at all these definitions, entries, and critically read them and edit them so that they're suitable for the current context.
Am I right in thinking that the correct English word for kurakan is millet?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. So without much ado, the forum is yours. The floor is yours, Rochana.
Okay, thank you. I just shared my presentation. Are you able to see it?
It says started shares. Okay. Yes, we can see that.
Okay, I'm going to switch between the slides. So can you let me know if it does, in fact, switch? Or is it still on the first slide?
No, it did change. Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay. So thank you very much for joining this presentation, everyone. So my topic for today is Sri Lankan cricket in the UK, a story of migration, recreation, and sociability. And I want to release a disclaimer, first of all, that this is not an exhaustive list of all the Sri Lankan cricket activities taking place in the UK, because I have just started my research. So part of my intention in doing this presentation today is also to see if I can have this as an information gathering session, because a PhD or a research of this nature, of a sociological nature, is always collaborative, and there's so much that I can learn from everyone. And obviously, at this moment, the current research I have done is based on my network of personal and professional connections, which might be small in certain ways. So I would like to extend that. I mean, all the people I've talked to are people who have been introduced to me by other people I know. So hopefully I can make more connections here and get more access to stories outside of what I have delineated here. Yes. So I'm going to start my presentation with this quote by C.L.R. James. He was a Trinidadian cricket writer. He has his famous saying, "What do they know of cricket who only cricket know?" So whenever I do a presentation on cricket, I always try to frame my presentations on this quotation. So this is actually the most often quoted line out of C.L.R. James's seminal work, Beyond the Boundary. He makes the point that it is impossible to grasp the full meaning of cricket if you only pay attention to what happens in the field of play. So in order to understand the game properly, you must look beyond the boundary. That's why he has named his book Beyond the Boundary. You have to look beyond the boundary, because the sport cricket is not just that game. It's not just a sport. It is so much larger than it is. It has an entire culture associated with it. And to date, even though it is a global sport, and even though it is much more popular in the subcontinent than it is in England, in certain ways, it is still known as an English sport, even though it is very much a global sport. And there are socio-political and historical reasons as to why cricket is still known as an English game or sport. And there's so much of the English culture associated with it. And there are so many definitions of the English culture as well. And there's so much of the English rural pastoral that is associated with English cricket. And then concepts like muscular Christianity, and cricket is known as a gentleman's game, but then what exactly is a gentleman? And then there are so many connotations and definitions to what all of this mean. And then, like I mentioned before, we now have different vernaculars of cricket. We have the Sri Lankan variety of cricket, and then we have other varieties. And there are so many iterations of cricket, and all of these have different cultural associations. So you cannot just look at the game on its own. It's always associated with a certain culture. So with that in mind, I will move on to waves of Ceylonese or Sri Lankan migration to the UK. So these, at least the first five, are the waves of migration that scholars of migration have put forward in terms of Sri Lankan migration to either UK or other countries. So the first one is in terms of the UK, in 1948, it was the British Nationality Act, which at its core granted the legal right for individuals from the Commonwealth to work and settle with their families in the UK. So it brought a lot of the Commonwealth, Commonwealth citizens into the UK. But apart from that, the main driver behind this immigration was the labor shortages that were needed to rebuild Britain after the conclusion of the Second World War. And then there was the active recruitment of people across the Commonwealth for institutions such as the National Health Service, London Transport, and the British Rail as well. So in effect, a framework was in place that not only opened the door for migrants to come to England, but also there were the pull factors that drew them to this metropolis. And then in Sri Lanka, we had the 1956 Languages Act, which made Sinhala the only official language, and that brought a lot of burghers to the UK, Australia, and other English-speaking countries, because Sinhala was now the official language in Ceylon at the time. And then in 1970s, there was stringent socialist reforms and economic pressures that came out of it, and that also made a lot of people migrate to other countries. And then, of course, in the 70s and 80s, we had civil tensions that brought a lot of people to UK, Canada, Europe, and other countries. And then in 2000s, we had a lot of people coming in for higher education, for their masters, PhDs. This is not to say that they didn't come before. It's just that after the 2000s, there was a boom in it. And also a lot of people coming here for undergraduate studies as well, especially students of international schools in Sri Lanka. And then the sixth wave is not something that is documented right at the moment in migration research on Sri Lanka, but this is something that I am just adding just for convenience's sake, or it might be something that is added, or it might be added in different form. But post 2020, I think in 2020 or 21 alone, there were about 1 million people who migrated outside the country because of the economic pressures. So I would like to, in my research, see how these different waves of migration have interacted with cricket, how they have used cricket as a form of sociability or recreation, or in a sense, as a form of national or cultural expression. But in this particular presentation, I don't have much information on how to analyze these different waves of migration and how they interacted with cricket, but I will bring in an intergenerational element into it, how first generation migrants interacted with cricket, and how it differs from how second and third generation members of the community interact with cricket. So let me start with some key figures in British cricket who were originally Ceylonese or Sri Lankan. I'd like to talk quite a bit about Alfred Holsinger because he is he's someone not a lot of people know about, because to date, a lot of people speak of Dr. Churchill Hector Gunasekara as the first Ceylonese or Sri Lankan to play for English county cricket. But that was in 1930. Alfred Holsinger actually played for British county cricket much before. He played for Wales and Lancashire, and during this time, all migrants of color were known as black people. So he is known as the first black professional to play for Lancashire and Wales. So so I have listed some of the clubs that he's been associated with. He's been associated with Clanackley Club, the Ride Club of Isle of Wight. And he's played for Liverpool, West Yorkshire, Durham, and all these clubs. But mostly he was associated with Lancashire and the Clanackley Club. And at the time, he was known as the fastest bowler in Ceylon, and I believe he was from St. Thomas's College. And I'll be mentioning some of these schools because at this stage, it was people who had captained Royal College or St. Thomas's College who came to the UK and then played for British county leagues. In Ceylon, he was known as the fastest bowler in Ceylon, and he had quite a good reputation, and he was a star player as well. And not only that, I haven't mentioned it here, but there is an urban legend, which could be true, that he had apparently won a race against a horse in a 100-meter race. So he was that strong, that fast. So let me quote something from a newspaper. I think this was when he was playing for Clanackley. He kept up a good length throughout. His deliveries were of an almost endless variety and puzzled the batsmen to such an extent that their innings ended in disarray. And then to his popularity, and also to show that he's someone who integrated quite well with the British society, Bob Harrigan, in his History of Clanackley Cricket Club, writes, Alfred Holsinger was a talking point throughout the town. Even though the then thriving seaport had seen plenty of Lascar seamen, they, however, did not mix with the leading professional men of the town, but Holsinger not only mixed with them, but also helped teach them how to play. So Lascar seamen are the seamen from the Indian Ocean, and that's what Indian Ocean region, that's what they were called at the time. So he was someone who well integrated with the society at the time, and he was quite popular, as noted in these two writings, and as well as some other writings that I've seen about him. And then now I'll go to Dr. Churchill Hector Gunasekara. He was the first-class Ceylonese cricketer to play for an English county. So I mentioned here he's not the first Ceylonese cricketer in general, but he's the first-class Ceylonese cricketer to play for an English county. And he debuted in 1919 for Middlesex. And around the time that he was playing, he was known as the best fielder in county cricket, which is quite a massive achievement. And he went to Cambridge University, but he was unable to get into the Cambridge University cricket team because of an outbreak at the time. So then he had to play for Middlesex. And then later on, you might know that he went on to captain Sri Lanka in its first overseas touring team in 1932, 1933. But at the same time, he was the chief medical officer in Ceylon. So then when there was a malaria epidemic outbreak, he had to go back and resume his duties as chief medical officer. And then there's Frederick de Sarum. He debuted in 1934 for Oxford University County Cricket Club. Oxford University Cricket Club. And then we have Laddie Outshawn, who debuted in 1946 for Worcestershire. And Laddie Outshawn was known as a very eccentric cricketer, judging from what I've read about him. And I don't know if that's why I couldn't find a photo of him, but the only picture that was available of him was this cartoon, keeping in line with his eccentric personality. And then we have Dan Pearshaw, who debuted in 1958, and he also played for Oxford University Cricket Club, and then also for Hampshire. And then there is Gamini Gunasena. He debuted in 1954 for Cambridge University Cricket Club, and he was the first Asian captain of the Cambridge University Cricket Club. So again, it goes to show how well of a reputation these cricketers had, and how they had they were integrating very well with the society that they were in. But of course, Gamini Gunasena himself, he did face some problems. But for the sake of time, I'm going to stick to the contributions that they have made. And then in 1962, we had two people, Stanley Jayasinghe and Clive Inman, who debuted for Leicestershire County Cricket. And both of them, so Clive Inman migrated to the UK after the 1956 Languages Act. Stanley Jayasinghe, as you may know, he returned to Sri Lanka afterwards and played for Sri Lanka as well. So these two were also prolific cricketers when they were playing, and they were very popular. They had good reputations. They were known for drawing in massive crowds. And Clive Inman specifically has a unique record of scoring half a century in under 8 minutes. And he was he also had a very interesting batting style, according to what I've read. I personally haven't I haven't really researched much into his cricket, but he's known for his interesting, energetic batting styles. And then so these are some of the cricketers, but also we have a lot more members of the Ceylonese or Sri Lankan cricket team who played for county cricket as well. But I thought of mentioning these figures as they kind of stand out in certain ways. And then we also have British-born, British Sri Lankans as well. So Gihan Mendes is one of them. Then we have Alistair Blair. So Gihan Mendes debuted in 1974 for Sussex, then went on to play for Lancashire. And then we had Dimitri Mascarenhas, who played for the English national team. He was an all-rounder. He was born in Sri Lanka, and then grew up he was born in England to Sri Lankan parents. He was born in Middlesex, but then he grew up for a bit in Australia and then returned to England to play for the English national team. And his surname Mascarenhas, he belongs to the Bharata community of Sri Lanka. And then, of course, we have players from recent times who also contributed to county cricket. So Aravinda de Silva was the first Sri Lankan cricketer to get into English county cricket or British county cricket after we were awarded test status in 1982. So he played for Kent. Sanat Jayasuriya played for Somerset, I believe, and then Muttaya Murugadan played for Lancashire. Chaminda Vas is the cricketer who has played for the most number of county cricket leagues in the UK. He's played for about 4 or 5 or 6, and that's more than the other cricketers. And then, of course, we have Kumar Sangakkara. So at the moment, I think he's played for Shillingstone in Dorset. but he started off with Warwickshire, Surrey, and then it was a very proud moment for all of us when he became the first non-British president of Marylebone, the MCC. So all these examples are to show how much of a strong cricketing culture we have had in Sri Lanka and Ceylon, when it was known as Ceylon, and how much Ceylonese or Sri Lankan cricketers have contributed to British cricket, both domestic cricket and also, at least in the case of Dimitri Mascarenas, he played for the national team as well. Yes, so now I'd like to talk about some events that Sri Lankans have initiated and founded and established, and that itself shows how the Sri Lankan community in the UK have created an aesthetic for themselves. One thing that I want to mention before going into all these events is to talk about how Sri Lankan cricket is usually viewed when it comes to immigrant or diasporic settings. I think I think we tend to think of Sri Lankans playing cricket as a form of long distance nationalism, that it's all about showcasing our Sri Lankan pride and holding on to our Sri Lankan identity, and that is very much a part of it, because there is a lot of Sri Lankan elements that are brought into these events, but at the same time, it's also a bit more nuanced than that, a bit more complex than that, because in the UK there are interacting or navigating through a diasporic space where it's not only the Sri Lankans, but also a form of, they have to venture into a form of interaction with the local population as well, and then integrate into the local population in a certain way. So it's not only about holding on to the Sri Lankan identity, but it's also about navigating through the community for social development, for community building, and so on. So let's talk a little bit about those events, and then we can get on to a more nuanced discussion of all of it. So I'm starting off with the Festival of Cricket, which was established in 1989. So at the moment, it has 32 colleges playing. So sorry, let me get into an introduction if there are people who don't know what the Festival of Cricket is based on. But the Festival of Cricket is based on the Sri Lankan school big match culture. So the big match culture in Sri Lanka is when every year during March, this is what we call the March Madness in Sri Lanka. Every year in March, boys schools, state schools, boys schools, play with their traditional rivals, a cricket match, and then it goes on for 2 or 3 days sometimes. And then there's a whole culture associated with it. There's a vehicle parade in some schools, and there are after parties, and it's a whole urban tradition in Sri Lanka. So that concept has been taken into the Festival of Cricket, where this is not something that is now, there are big matches, friendly big matches being played across the UK by members of the Sri Lankan community, by past students of these schools. But Festival of Cricket aims to bring all of it together into one day. So at the moment, I believe there are 32 OBAs in the Festival of Cricket, and in 2025 they'll be celebrating their 35th anniversary. So I spoke to the founder, GC Pereira, as well, and he gave me a lot of information about this. So he spoke to me about how it all started, how he went to watch a match at Oval or Lords, and then he saw this crowd of Sri Lankans cheering and playing music, and he just got so entranced by it that he felt like, oh, maybe we should organize something like this. And obviously, at the time in 1989, it didn't seem like it was going to, it was such a massive task to bring something like this together. But then after talking with OBAs and finally getting people to gather, this was started in 1989. And it still continues on to this day, and it has become the largest Sri Lankan gathering in the UK. And it is now it is much more than just a cricket game as well, because there's a carnival, there are food stalls, there are playpens for children. There's music going on. There's a small concert going on. So it's so much more than just the game. There's a culture that is now associated with the Festival of Cricket as well, and also this has not gone without challenges, especially when it in terms of civil tensions in Sri Lanka, that those were kind of reproduced here as well. Some of the northern schools who were initially playing for Festival of Cricket, they ultimately had to pull away in the 1990s due to various factors, due to certain external pressures, and factors related to the tension that was going on back home, which were again reproduced here. So I'll talk a bit more about all of this at the end. So, but I'll move on with the events, and I believe GC Pereira is also in the meeting here. So maybe we can have a discussion afterwards. And then I'll talk about the famous law medical cricket encounter as well. So this is also based on the law medical cricket encounter that took place in Colombo University. So that started in 1913, and its iteration in the UK started in 2004. And you'll see I've mentioned, I've put in these pictures that were kindly provided by Dr. Ajantha Jayasinghe for this presentation. So Dr. Ajantha Jayasinghe was the first captain of the doctors team, yes. So again, you see in this poster, there is so much more. It's not just about the cricket game itself. There's live music, there's delicious barbecues, authentic kottu, and more. And it's all about there's music, bring your family and friends, and it's a whole social carnival event. And this is marketing for this is done, or publicity for this is always given by the Sri Lankan Lawyers Association in the UK and the SLMDA, the Sri Lankan Medical and Dental Association. And then later on, netball matches were also added to it. Yes, and then I'll talk a bit about the Manchester Lions Cricket Club. I got information for this initially from Dr. Ruan Desoisa, who established it with some other people, and then I talked to Dr. Susanto Degedre as well. So from what I've learned, this was again just supposed to be just a friendly group of people just playing friendly matches with each other. But then later on, they discovered a team in High Wycombe, and then they started to play with High Wycombe, and then later on, a few years afterwards, they discovered a team in Stoke-on-Trent, and then it culminated in a three-way tournament. And then later on, it acquired other elements to it. So again, very much like the Festival of Cricket or the Law Medical Encounter, it had elements of the carnival cricket sort of atmosphere. You have the annual dinner dance, then all these families would go on trips together, and it's just a social social gathering outside of the cricket. But also, so as you can see in this picture in the middle, it's also all about collecting funds and giving back to the country in a sense, because the Manchester Lions Cricket Club, so all the proceeds go into funding cricket equipment for schools in Sri Lanka, and most of these schools are from under-resourced areas. So the Manchester Lions Cricket Club gives priority to funding cricket equipment for these schools. So there's that element, the philanthropic element in Sri Lankan cricket as well, that goes much beyond just the game in the pitch. And then I'd like to talk about the Watford Chesham Sri Lanka High Commission tournament as well. It's called the Triangular Tournament. I don't think you can see it in the trophy here, but it was called the Triangular Tournament. So this was in 2024, but the Watford Chesham matches were taking place since the year before that, but the High Commission joined last year. So again, it's about it was a social gathering. So you had families come in. You had women also playing a cricket match on the side. So we'll talk a bit more about that. But the main event was the men's cricket match. But then you also had the women's cricket match, and then there were children running around as well, and food, music. So there is very much a certain type of culture that is associated with Sri Lankan cricket that you can see in this Sri Lankan cricket communities and cricketing communities cultures as practiced in the UK. And then I'll talk about Baila Blast. So all these other events that I spoke about, they are organized by first generation immigrants to the UK. But here, Baila Blast is something that was initiated by second generation members of the community, or maybe even there are a lot of third generation members of the community involved with Baila Blast as well. So I spoke to one of the co-founders, David Gunawardana. So he gave me a lot of information, and I have a lot of content that I can put up here as well, because this is the social media generation. So they do have a lot of content on internet, on social media, which, makes it easy to document certain stuff. So one thing that I want to talk about here is that, so again, it's a festival. It's cricket the game, but also cricket alone doesn't sell. So it's a festival, it's a social gathering. But if you look at this, what I found very interesting was the mention of Afrobeat here, which is very indicative of how the second generation, third generation immigrant communities, how multicultural their community is. So at the moment, I work with teenagers. So I see this very much. How these teenagers code switch between these languages. So so if you take South Asian teenagers, the way they talk to their parents is obviously a bit different. The kind of English that they use is a bit different to how they speak with their friends. So when it comes to speaking with their friends, it is very much influenced by the multicultural London dialect, and that multicultural London dialect includes a lot of Afro-Caribbean slang and then South Asian slang. In the current, so with these teenagers that I work with, you have, I find a lot of teenagers outside the South Asian community who also use South Asian slang and sometimes swear words just as a form of bonding. So this language is also not just limited to these, communities anymore. It's all a mix. That's why it's the multicultural London dialect is a mix of everything, and that has been brought into this Baila festival as well. And then also with the Baila festival, there are also other events like pre-pub crawl event. And then again, here you can see bring the family element here. You have Sri Lankan food, you bring the parents around, and then Sri Lankan music, barbecue bar, uh, and there's an auntie gossiping area as well, kids area, outdoor activities. So this Baila Blast, it has a franchise of its own, the Pearl Panthers, Cinnamon Cobras. So all of these four teams, they represent different parts of the UK. So the Pearl Panthers, for example, they represent the Midlands teams, and Cinnamon Cobras teams from outer London. Emerald Elephants from the north and west, and Lotus Leopards from London. What I forgot to mention was that this is, I think, mostly university students. So all these teams, they comprise people from these specific universities. So universities in the Midlands, universities in Outer London, and there's also a philanthropic element here as well. So apart from this carnival, the festival aspect of it, I believe David Gunawardhan, he owns a philanthropic project called Link to Lanka. So funds go to Link to Lanka, and then it's for the purpose of resourcing certain elements that need resourcing in Sri Lanka. And another thing that comes up in speaking to second or third generation Sri Lankans is that the importance of football to cricket as well. So in 2024, the Baila Blast Festival coincided with the Euro 2024 final screening. And so the Baila Blast took place in the morning, and then the evening they screened the football match, the final match, and that itself was a driving factor for, one, for people to attend Baila Blast, and maybe it was like a mutual thing. People who wanted to watch only football decided to come to Baila Blast as well, or people who came to Baila Blast would stay on for the Euro final screening as well. And also the football. So apart from cricket, they also have a football league as well, and that is almost exclusively that almost exclusively consists of British Sri Lankans. So the second and third generation Sri Lankan immigrants, because obviously in this country they grew up with cricket, with football. So football is also very much an important aspect, and it's almost intertwined with cricket as well. So that is an interesting direction, I think, we might be able to see in Sri Lankan cricket in the future, how football also has an impact and how football also matters to Sri Lankan cricket in the UK. Yes, and gosh, I said I wanted to say something and it just slipped out of my mind. Okay, it'll come back eventually. So so I want to talk a little bit about this, family element. I think with everyone I spoke to, everyone spoke about this family element. It's supposed to be a family fun day. It's a day that you enjoy with your family members. It's a day where everyone in the family can sort of revel in what's happening, and basically it's for community building. And I just found this very interesting because in certain cultures, when it comes to sports, especially because sports is such a masculine thing, because of all of that, sport is sometimes seen in certain cultures as a way to get away from your family. So sometimes these men would, organize various matches, whatever sport, just to sort of, have some respite from their families. But then here in our Sri Lankan cricket community, it's not about, getting away from your families. That concept does not even exist. It's about, because being a very family centric community, I suppose, it's all about bringing the family together. And I think with the Baila Blast as well, what I was told was that they wanted to have parents come in because because then the students would maintain more discipline, so there won't be fights that emerge out of nowhere. When your parents are around, you're on your best behavior. And same with having I mean, of course, when it comes to the first and generation community, it's about the parents. But then when it comes to the cricketers in these other events that I mentioned, it's about bringing again, it could be parents, but also wives and children. And so as you can see, there's so much of the culture that is beyond just the game. And another thing that I wanted to mention, so in Baila Blast, they also had something called the traffic light party, where people had to have a band in different colors. I believe, yeah, a red band if you're in a relationship or you're not interested, a green band if you're single and you're looking for someone. So and the yellow band if you are in a complicated relationship. So so I just found it interesting in the sense of how I'm not sure that was the intention, but then in terms of cultural continuity and sort of getting together with people of your own community for a certain sense of cultural continuity. I mean, obviously it's not just in Baila Blast. I'm sure it happened it happens in the other events as well, where you have the children of this first generation immigrants also, where that element would also be in this event. And it also happens in Sri Lanka as well. But, it just brings in another interesting dimension to this diasporic aesthetic. So there are also some other events that I have not talked about. I think very important ones. For example, the friendly big matches between different OBAs that happen during summer. The separate ones, not just the ones within the Festival of Cricket, but the Battle of the Maroons that happens separately. The friendly matches that take place separately. But this is because I was not able to talk to that many people, so I decided I'll leave it for later research. And then also one important thing that I would like to focus on is the British Tamils Cricket League. They were formed in 2006. And again, for various reasons, they had to form a separate league for British Tamils for reasons due to the civil war in Sri Lanka. And then there are three others that I noted, but I'm sure there are more. There's the Midland Lankans CC Cricket Club, and then there's Lanka Lions CC, which I believe belongs to Middlesex CC League, and then the Sri Lankan Cavaliers Cricket Club, which belongs to the Middlesex Premier Cricket League. So these are some of the things that I just noticed from a very a surface level research at this point, but I'm sure there are more, and I would like to have more information on those. And I'd also like to talk a little bit about the status of British Asians in general when it comes to cricket, and how that is also a politicized identity. So when it comes to British Asians, I think for the longest time, they were, I think I'll stop my presentation because I do not have that content. So I'll just talk about it. But yes. Oh no, I'm still sharing, aren't I? Okay. Yes. So for the longest time, British South Asians were subsumed under the colored migrant label, because all migrants were known as colored migrants. But then after certain events in history, like in 1960s and 70s, the Brixton riots and tensions between the English population and the Afro-Caribbean population, then British Asians started to identify themselves as South Asians in the UK. But then later on, this also started to get compartmentalized, and in 1980s, they started to identify themselves as British Sikhs, British Punjabis, or British Pakistanis, and all of that. And for the longest time, they were known as a silent minority. And even within this silent minority, I think Sri Lankans have also been a silent minority within that silent minority. So there is not a lot of research done on Sri Lankan communities in general in the UK. So that is something that I would like to have some insight on. But in the 1990s, especially with the rise of the second generation Sri Lankan community, the Asian identity became much more politicized. You had the Asian youth movement also coming in, and I do not see big, I do not see Sri Lankan names in any of these movements, at least not much. And, there's not much mention of how Sri Lankans have taken part in these politicizing movements. But the fact is, in the 1990s, we became the British Asian community became a politicized entity. And especially in the 1990s, we had things like the Tebbit test, or introduced by, Norman Tebbit, a conservative politician. So he said something like, the way that you can measure how loyal or integrated immigrants are to this country is if you look at what cricket teams they support. So if England is playing against India, and if they're supporting India, then they're not loyal, then they're not integrated. So this was known as a controversial thing, but I think a few years ago he rescinded that. He said that there's no need for that test anymore. So there were a lot of these events that took place. And also another thing that I'd like to mention, there are other cultural elements like singing of the Sri Lankan and British national anthems in some of these events, and that doesn't take place in Baila Blast, for instance, because with the first generation migrants, they had a different sense of what it means to integrate to the British community and what it means to be Sri Lankan. But then when it comes to the second generation and third generation migrants who form much of the population or the demographic in Baila Blast, they had a different conceptualization of integration, assimilation to the British society. They have a different idea of what it means to be Sri Lankan, different nuances to that discussion. So yes, and before I end the presentation, there is just one other part that I would like to look into. Let me see. Okay, so okay, I'm going to close my presentation, but I'd also like to talk about Italian cricket, cricket in Italy, because this was fascinating to me, because I went to the Italian embassy about 3 months ago to attend a talk on Italian cricket. And I just went to it because it was on cricket and I was interested in seeing what this talk was about. But then I didn't know what to expect, because I never really connected Italy with cricket. But then I go to this talk, and then they talk about the father of Italian cricket, and then the father of Italian cricket is Sri Lankan, Alphonsus Jayaraja. So I just found it really interesting, and then it started to make sense. We had such a massive migration from Sri Lanka to Italy in the 1970s and 80s. And of course, it would be South Asian populations who make up the foundation of Italian cricket. But then this was almost exclusively, at least in the beginning, almost exclusively Sri Lankan. So that was also interesting for me to learn. And then I think I spoke to some people here with regard to English cricket as well. And I think in the Baila Blast, for example, I was told that when it comes to all these, people who come to Baila Blast, not only do you hear English, Sinhala, and Tamil, but you also hear Italian. So it's truly a multilingual society. And then we now have migrants from Italy, so Sri Lankans who migrated to Italy, who then afterwards migrated to the UK. So the twice migrants, you have that as well. So sorry, I just realized I was sharing my screen. Yes, so there's so much that can be looked into in terms of Sri Lankans going and pioneering things everywhere, especially in terms of cricket, how it is a factor or vehicle for sociability, recreation. And one thing that I also want to mention is that so I am, in a sense, I'm an outsider to this community in the sense that I'm not a diasporic member of the community. I grew up in Sri Lanka. So there is a lot of insight that I might not get, but at the same time, me being an outsider does give me the critical distance that is necessary to observe what is happening in the UK. So one thing that I noticed is there's a concept called the immigrant time capsule. So the immigrant time capsule is how certain cultures, when they migrate to other countries, they tend to retain or preserve some cultural elements, which sort of change back in the home country. So to give an example, I'll talk about English, Sri Lankan English, for example, because that's my area. So when I hear Sri Lankan English banter here, especially in this forum or anywhere, I feel like the Sri Lankan English banter or even the Sinhala slang that people use is Sinhala slang or Sri Lankan English from about 20 years ago, whereas the Sinhala language and the kind of Sri Lankan English we use in Sri Lanka has also gone through many changes over the years. So it's kind of interesting to see how, this language that I hear in the UK is the language in Sri Lanka about maybe 20 years ago. And in terms of music as well, when I go to Sri Lankan parties in the UK, all of the music is from the 1960s and 70s, mostly, almost exclusively. All the Baila music is from that period, whereas Baila music has also, there are newer additions to Baila music in Sri Lanka, which do not show up here. And then when I talk to second or third generation members of the immigrant community, they would speak the kind of Sinhala or the kind of Sri Lankan English that their parents would speak. Whereas, I would speak Sinhala or Sri Lankan English a bit different. So that's what the immigrant time capsule is about. And even in terms of things like your furniture, especially in these settings, in immigrant settings, we tend to have a bit more Sri Lankanness in all our furniture. We would have cushions with Sinhala letters on them, something to sort of preserve the cultural identity. So I've only been in this country for 2 years, but I'm already storing a lot of Sri Lankan looking items just for, showcase, because, it makes me think of home. So this immigrant time capsule does not exist the same way now, I think, with social media, because there's more spread of, you do get the chance to listen to Sinhala music or Sri Lankan music from back home. So, you do have access to like newer forms of all of this. So with social media, the effect of the immigrant time capsule is a bit less, but, it does exist in certain ways. So yes, so I'd like to end my presentation here, but I do have a lot to say, which might come up in the discussions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rochana. That was an excellent resume of Sri Lankan cricket in the United Kingdom. And I was very much impressed by the amount of research you have done, not only on cricket, on other things as well. To give you an example, I was very much impressed how you pronounce Llanelli, because I'm living quite near Wales, and I went for some Welsh lessons as well in the past. So the Sri Lankans probably would pronounce it as Lanelli, Lanelli, whereas the English pronounce it as Llanelli, and the proper Welsh pronunciation, which you did correctly, is Llanelli. Thank you very much for that.
Oh,
Um,
that is because I went to school in Carmarthen when I
ah,
my father used to work in Clanacley, so I used to hear this on a daily basis. But
oh,
also I'm a language student, so I do
yes.
try to make my pronunciations. Try to research my pronunciations.
Full
Ruan,
marks for that. Yes,
I think I
yes.
can do a little bit better.
Oh,
I
really?
lived
Try.
I lived in Llanelli.
Where is that?
I lived in Llanelli.
Yeah, I know. So
Yeah.
go ahead. That's good pronunciation. Um, right. So moving on, I have a question as well to you, and then I'll open it for discussion. So my question is, I think you mentioned about this Baila, and I can remember when I was in Sri Lanka, we attended our school's cricket, and the Papare band is one of the things which we all still cherish. Um, is that tradition originated, the Papare band and the music and the music scene during cricket matches? Was it a Sri Lankan invention, or was it started in some other country and we got it from there? I don't expect any answers, but if you don't know, there may be somebody who can enlighten us in the audience. If not, that should be probably a part of your research as well.
Yeah. So papare itself is a Sri Lankan origin thing. The kind of baila we use and the idea of the whole trumpets and the instruments that we use in papare bands. But the idea of music in cricket, I think I mean cricket for the longest time, it was always known as a silent, subdued game. And then especially with West Indies playing cricket in the 1960s and 70s, especially, they brought about a certain carnivalization of cricket. And this term was used in a derogatory manner in the 1970s and 80s. But, they brought the music into cricket. And I think in the 1980s, somewhere in the 1980s, or spectators of Caribbean origin were even banned from stadiums because of the music and because they brought flags in, and they brought in this carnival sort of atmosphere into the stadium, which was not associated with cricket before. And Caribbean cricket is also known as calypso cricket for that reason. So this whole carnival atmosphere, all of it was, I think, initially introduced by the West Indies, the Caribbean teams. But I think we are also musical communities, the subcontinental community. So we also brought that iteration, maybe influenced by the Caribbean teams. Yes.
Thank you. So knowing that there are several generations of cricketers in this audience as well, I can see some of them, and you have met some of them, some of them. I would like to open for questions. Who would want to start? Questions or even comments. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question. It can be a comment.
Can I just make an observation and ask,
Okay. Yes, please.
ask what Rochana has to say?
Yeah.
Talking of pronunciation, I used to call her Rochana. Then I was corrected. That's what her name is. Yeah. Just some thoughts on why cricket became popular. These are some of my thoughts. Firstly, there are many ways you can play cricket. So you can play cricket on the beach, on the backyard. You can play cricket with your suitcase as the wickets, with a softball. So that itself is a great attraction because you don't need a whole amount of equipment and expensive places to play cricket. So it's very accessible. Then, of course, the variety, like having tennis ball, softball cricket, rather than. I remember myself being really frightened of playing with a leather ball because those days we were not protected in vital areas and it could be extremely painful. Then, other thing, your physique is not vital. If you want to be a rugby player of international stature, you need a big fellow. In cricket, you can be a tiny chap. Smaller, the better the batsman. And technical skill is not that huge. I know that the top batsmen and bowlers have a lot of skill, but many young people can be just taught how to play the basic game of cricket. And it was very socially acceptable. You can't go anywhere in Sri Lanka without seeing people playing cricket somewhere. And have to admit, though, in school cricket at the very beginning, there was a lot of elitism. You'll find that the top cricketers were either Colombo schools or Trinity or whatever. You didn't get many outstation schools, and if you look at the Sri Lanka cricket team, they were all speaking English, and people used to look down on people who couldn't speak English properly. All that has now gone, thank you. And of course, once cricket became popular and successful, there are a whole new reasons why people want to play cricket. A lot of it is money. If you're a top class cricketer, you make a lot of money. You become popular, you become elite, you become known throughout the land, and your self-image goes up, and your fame goes up. So the incentives for cricket became quite different as time went by. So those are some of my thoughts, Rochana. I don't know whether you have any comments on that.
Yeah, thank you. So about this elite perspectives, elitism that existed in Ceylonese cricket at the time, and then Sri Lankan cricket. So Frederick Deserum, I included him in the presentation, but I do, have problems with some of his. For example, he's one of the people who called non-Anglican school people, sarong johnnies, and he did use some derogatory terms to call people outside this Anglican school atmosphere. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. And also what you said about cricket and making money. I think at the moment everyone's talking about, especially IPL, how it's this big money making industry, and I mean I'm guilty of that as well. During a certain period in my life, well, during the past few years, I was also saying things like, oh no, it's like become very mercenary and everything, and cricket has lost its spirit and all of that. I used to say things like that as well, but then I realized, look, once I started researching into cricket history, I started realizing that everything about cricket has been about making money. So at the very beginning, somewhere around the 1700s, there was a lot of gambling involved in cricket, and then even this county cricket system, when it first came about, people were opposing it because county cricket drew in a lot of crowds, so it stopped being this sort of like isolated game. Why do you have to print out tickets and bring people to this game? You can just play on your own without making money out of it. So there was a lot of things happening, and with the British railway station or system also coming into play, you saw the birth of cricket tourism. So people use these trains to go to other places to watch matches, and then people at the time were criticizing that as well. So I think even with what's happening right now, I think maybe it's just for us to just observe and enjoy what's happening and see what would come into it. And also again, with regard to this, the whole money making thing, for a time in English cricket history, it was considered almost, taboo in a sense to play for money. Like if you're a professional cricketer, that means you're you're not part of that upper class society, because if you have to play for money, then it's not a good thing. But if you play because you enjoy the game, then that means you enjoy a certain lifestyle, a certain luxurious lifestyle, which gives you that privilege to enjoy the sport without having to earn out of it. In a similar way, in the 1700s, 1800s, doctors were considered working class in the English society because they had to work for their living, as opposed to people with landed wealth. So obviously these things have changed a lot over the centuries. So yeah, just wanted to bring that element as well.
Thank you, Rochana, for that. I just want to point out that Mahendra used the term backyard cricket, and I think the correct word, Sri Lankan way of saying that is backside cricket. That's what we use, but it gives an entirely different meaning in United Kingdom. So we don't call it backside cricket in UK. Moving on, I actually saw, is that Padmini? Padmini, is it okay if I wait because there are 3 hands up and then I'll give you a chance after that? Is that okay? Unless there's an urgent stuff about what we are talking now. I'll go through the list. Starting with Arya, Satyari Nagan. Sati's gone to sleep, perhaps?
No, I think he's waking up slowly.
Okay, you're not in Llanelli. All right, okay.
No, I'm far away in Llanelli.
Go ahead.
This is just a question to Rochana. I may have missed something during your presentation because I had to leap out for a cuppa. Did your research with regards to the Sri Lankans playing cricket in UK include Clive Inman's tenure in UK? Clive Inman. I think you're muted.
Yes, I had Clive Inman on my slides.
Okay, Satya was sleeping by that time, I think. He just woken up.
I just told you that I went for a cuppa. You're not listening, Ruwan. The second thing is just for your information, in case you did not think about it, something I also didn't think before your presentation was notified, and that is a query about your research, including Sri Lankans or Sri Lankan cricket enthusiasts officiating in international, if not UK county cricket. Because I came across a gentleman by the name of Dr. Balendra not long ago, who was, I think he was, Punchi might know him because he probably belongs to Punchi's generation. He was captaining Jaffna Central College in the 60s. And he is now in a big way involved in umpiring. And apparently it's a big process, it seems, to qualify as an umpire. It takes a while. I don't know whether you included that in your research.
I actually did not. So thank you very much for...
So what I can do is I will put you in touch with him. Maybe it will be useful for your future presentations.
Yes, thank you very much. That's a very useful...
The last thing I wanted to comment on is, you mentioned about British Tamil cricket. Mm-hmm. I think there was a British, or rather Sri Lankan Tamil schools cricket involvement with the Festival of Cricket. They all were together at the beginning. But I think they must have separated about 10 years ago. Yeah, schools like St. John's, St. Patrick's, all the leading schools who played cricket in Jaffna were part of it. And I think subsequently they separated. I think they still have the same name. They call them Jaffna Schools Cricket or something like that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Sati, I think Sam very correctly points out that you're an anachronism. You're wearing winter jackets on a beach. I don't know why. Anyway, next question is from Udita.
Hi, Rochana. I really enjoyed your talk. So well done. I learned a few things. You may not like me after I go through some of the questions because I got several questions. First is Sri Lanka has got over 20 million population, and as you know, more than 95% of the population is mad about cricket. Are you the only one who is going to get a doctorate in cricket? Or do you know of anyone?
I don't know. So there are people who have certainly written about cricket. They have written academic articles, which I have used for my research. And just because you mentioned the word mad about cricket, one of these articles actually calls this a sociopathic cricket mania of the subcontinent. So I think that's very apt, cricket unma there. But yeah, I've definitely seen academic articles, but I don't know if there are is entirely on cricket, Sri Lankan cricket.
So if you get your doctorate, you are going to be, national figure in Sri Lanka cricket, isn't it? I mean,
I don't know.
Is going to be extremely unique, I think. Right. So, okay. The next question is, Sri Lankan big match culture, which is quite unique to Sri Lanka. I feel that it is unique to Sri Lanka. Do you know of any similar in any of the other countries? Such atmosphere. I know they must be having traditional rivalries, but that culture of the big match, is it being seen in any other countries?
So that's an interesting question, because in my research, I've only come across Sri Lanka, who plays cricket in that sense. I mean, of course, there are university teams and college teams, but even in England, it's not that, they don't have such a big cricketing culture among schools. But the closest thing I can think of is cricket nurseries in the Caribbean islands, where they had cricket schools, and but after a while I think they just dwindled, but I think so far from what I've seen, the only country with like a rich schoolboy cricketing tradition is Sri Lanka. And I think Nicholas Brooks, he wrote this entire history on Sri Lankan cricket called An Island's 11. And he says that he himself, with his research, he says that we are quite unique in the sense that we are the only country where schoolboy cricketing serves as a sort of breeding site for national cricket teams. So I believe that we might be the only country.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good Sri Lankan brand of cricket which we could export, isn't it? Unique
Exactly.
Sri Lankan brand of cricket we could export at least to the schools. So my next question is, you did mention about Sri Lankans cricketers playing in England. Have you looked into similar influence of Sri Lankan cricketers in Australia and New Zealand, or
no, not in Australia and New Zealand. This is specifically UK.
Yeah. The other thing is Sri Lankan cricketers influencing many other lesser cricketing nations like Canada, US, and many other countries. I mean, you did mention Italy.
Yes.
I'm sure there are lots of Sri Lankan as well as Asian cricketers who are the main engine behind cricketing in those countries. Are you going to look into that, or?
Yes, I will eventually look into that. But at the moment, I mean, with regard to US, I remember reading something a long time ago, so I might be wrong about this, but I do remember reading something about the very first professional cricketer in the US being of Sri Lankan origin, which I think is quite interesting. And also, like I mentioned, in Italy, Italy is the other country outside the UK that I've sort of extensively looked into. And I've also heard in Austria that Austria also has a cricketing culture that was established by a Sri Lankan. So that is something that I would also like to look into. And in Italy, another thing that I would like to talk about is in Italy, one of the clubs, I think the Lazio Cricket Club, they introduced cricket not only as a form of like sociability among the Sri Lankan migrants, but they really wanted to introduce cricket to the Italians as well. So to the white Italians. So what they did was they tried to make cricket as a way of teaching English to the Italian population. So they went around. I think their campaign was something called Let's Learn English Through Cricket. So that got in a lot of like white Italians to their team. So that's something that I thought would be interesting to mention. Yeah.
Just on that topic, can I just mention that I have a friend in one of my ex-school friends in one of the Balearic Islands, and he said it could be Majorca or one of those islands, and he said they have a Sri Lankan cricket team there, and he wanted to play with the Manchester team. So yeah, there are the lesser known areas as well.
Yeah.
So sorry for that interruption.
And sorry, I just remembered this is something from about 2 or 3 years ago. It just came to my mind. But I watched a film on Sri Lankan migrant so Sri Lankan migrants in Timor-Leste, and it was and in that film I remember seeing people playing cricket. So obviously in that case it was just they didn't have leagues as such, in the same way that you have in the UK, Australia, or Italy, but it was just leisure time. But these communities have introduced cricket to countries like Timor-Leste and also Fiji as well. So yeah.
Right, thanks. So can I just ask a few other questions?
No. Can you just move on, and then we'll come back
all right.
to you.
Okay. Yeah.
Because otherwise it's not fair. Because okay, there is a Zoom user. I don't know who he is. If you can put up your video, that would be good. Zoom user. Even if you can't show us your face, you can start your question. You're still muted. Nope. Okay, let's move on to Padmini then. Padmini, you had a question. You're muted, Padmini. You don't know how to unmute yourself. Okay, until you find out how to unmute, let's go to Aja or Rasika. Aja, Rasika? There seems to be a problem here.
As host, Ruan, are you able to unmute?
No, I can't unmute.
No, you can mute. But
no, I can mute. I can't unmute. So what happened now? Aja and Rasika completely gone out, although they had Zoom user still not ready. Zoom user, don't know who that is. Padmini, are you still struggling to unmute yourself? It looks like you're using a phone, mobile phone, and it's unmute. You have to unmute it. Okay, Sam, Jasmine. Sam, oh right, he is a ex-Sri Lankan cricketer who played for, I don't know, is it NCC or something? Go ahead, Sam.
Thank you, Rochana. The first and foremost, the Rochana I knew was a boy, and it is a pleasant surprise to see a female face on there. Secondly, it's nice to see some old stalwarts. Koo Seram was our cricket coach, and famous people like Clive Inman, Garmin Gunnesen, and Stanley Jayasinghe approach. I'll just see that Rochana's got the knowledge and he got the fluency of the cricketing area. Also, she got the looks of it. So why not she take on 2 commentaries of cricket matches?
Oh, is that okay?
I'd like to see you commentating in one of the cricket matches. You look lucrative.
Thank you. But at the same time, I think I should have maybe established this at the beginning. So whenever I talk about my interest in cricket history, a lot of people automatically assume that I have a deep knowledge to give ball by ball commentaries or opinions on who might be the next cricket captain of certain countries, or of Sri Lanka in particular. But the thing is, I am a social history person, not a cricket history person, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't know how to give an analysis of cricket itself. My father certainly can, but not me. But I'm just a person who is someone who is interested in society and how people just interact with each other. And then cricket happens to be my passion project. So I think that's the answer to that. If I had to commentate at a match, I don't think I'll know what to do. Yeah.
You have all the ingredients for a successful commentator.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. No, maybe I'll think about it. Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, for that. And I'll just read out a question from Bodhini. I think she must have gone by now. Just to give you an outlook of who Bodhini is. Bodhini is the sister of the famous cricketer Bandula Warnapura. She has put up a question here. Very interesting talk, Rochana. Thank you. There is another group of professional cricketers who came to UK every summer to play professional cricket in the UK, who plays for clubs and also train and coach youngsters here in the UK. So she was just mentioning it as another group. I think I had this discussion with you as well, whether you want to consider including that group as well in your research. There's no answer to that. I'll leave it to you. Let's move on to probably Aja or Rasika.
Hi, it's me really. It was a comment to Dita's question about Sri Lankans training international other nationalities. So I know for a fact that the Dutch cricket team was trained by Flavian Aponso. He was married to one of my relatives, and that's how I came to know of that.
Who captained St. Sebastian's in my younger days? Flavian.
Yeah.
Yes. I can remember Flavian. I didn't know that he was the coach for the Dutch team.
Was coaching, yes.
Okay.
The Dutch team.
Thank you.
There was another question in the chat. Somebody's asking, Padmini is asking, did you mention about female cricket? And Visakha were the champions because Padmini is from Visakha.
No, so that is something I would like to include in my research for sure. It's just that there's so much more knowledge and resources available on men's cricket. So yeah, for the moment I have to focus on men's cricket, but I will look into women's cricket as well.
Thank you. Zoom user, presumably still not ready. Let's go to Mahendra and then go to Dit again.
Rochana, you may have touched on you. I didn't go for a cuppa, but it's quite possible that I missed it. One of the things about cricket that fascinates me in Sri Lanka is the huge unifying influence it has among ethnicities, because in a cricket team, it doesn't really matter whether you're a Tamil or a Sinhalese or a Burger. You just play for the team, you admire each other, you respect each other, and that is huge. I mean, Muralitharan, the most successful test bowler in Sri Lanka, is a Tamil, and we're all proud of that. So I like cricket for the fact that that's a ground where your cultural influences don't matter very much, and you just bond together as people who have similar likes. And on the same theme, you might have mentioned that. Did you link the colonial history of and cricket? Because if you look at cricket in nation, they're all ex-colonies of Britain, most of them, not all. So there is that link also. So I think cricket has so many fascinating aspects to it. So I don't know whether you have any comments on what I just mentioned now.
Yeah, regarding the colonial aspect, so I mean, that was definitely something I looked into in my master's research. But then, for the sake of the presentation, I didn't want to bring all of that into it. But, during the colonial rule, even though it did start being played in Ceylon in the 1830s, it was still the settling Englishmen who played it, the tea planters and everyone. But then it took Ashley Walker in 1870s to introduce it to Royal College, and then started the whole big match tradition. And then you had George van der Spa, who made it a point to see that Ceylon had overseas tours. And then he also the whistle stop tours, if you know about it. This was when during the Ashes, the England team and the Australian team, they would use Ceylon as this stop, and then they would come and because they would travel by ship, right? So they would come and play cricket in Ceylon at the time as a sort of like a practice session, or just for to pass time while they were at that stop. And then that also contributed a lot to Ceylon improving its cricketing abilities. Yes, and and the other one about colonies, cricket in colonies. So it's interesting that so in Singapore, for example, and even in the US, even though it was introduced by the settling English community, even though cricket was introduced by the settling English community, after they left, it was actually the South Asians who, continued the cricket. They're the ones who put up, for example, in Singapore, the very first cricket club was the Bengali Cricket Club. So it was South Asians who popularized cricket, even though, it wasn't like a leftover thing of imperialism. Like when the English settlers left these countries, cricket didn't continue. It wasn't a leftover thing, but the South Asians had to reintroduce it. And again, it was a South Asian brand of cricket that they introduced. So, yeah.
Talking of cricketers of Sri Lankan origin who live in non-Commonwealth countries, two of my friends, Larif Idrus and Cyril Ernest, represented America.
Oh.
Yeah, the national team. And I think Cyril Ernest captained the team.
Oh, I think that must be the person I read about. Yeah.
And also, am I right in thinking famous or infamous Satasivam, captain, was it Singapore? Sri Lanka and Singapore or Malaysia?
Malaysia.
One of the countries, yeah. Years ago, that is.
He captained Malaysia.
Malaysia, yes. There is somebody in the audience, David Duns, who has written a very lengthy comment. He seems to be quite informative about cricket. So, David, do you want to ask the question or share the comment?
No, sorry, I was just passing on a little bit of information. It was two comments in the chat, and I don't really need to add to them, but I just thought they might be of interest. And I'm sorry, I'm an interloper. I'm British.
No.
I'm in.
Just read out your thoughts, because I don't think everybody has a chance to read.
Well, all I was saying was, I think this business about schools as a breeding ground for cricketers is also true in the UK, and you'll see that in the UK. the English national side has always been disproportionately composed of public school, so-called public school, they're called private schools, cricketers. And that's true to this day. And in many ways, it's actually become worse over the last few decades because state schools have been losing their playing fields and sport has tended to be pushed out of schools and into clubs. So I think that's, and also public schools have been giving cricketers scholarships. So they've encouraged people in who wouldn't otherwise have gone to public schools on the basis of scholarships. And the only other thing I said was, it was just a comment, an aside about when I was playing cricket in Thailand in the 1980s, and not everybody thinks of Thailand as a cricket playing country, but there was a very thriving cricket community there. It just so happened that both of the correspondents for the two English language newspapers in Thailand at the time was Sri Lankan, Edward Thangaraja and Anton Pereira. And there were also a number of Sri Lankans playing, and I'm sure still are playing. I played with a guy called Andre Tisera for the British club Bangkok, who was a beautiful player and a really delightful guy to have as a teammate. So I just thought you'd be interested in those little asides.
Thank you very much, David. That's very useful. I certainly did not think of Thailand at all. Thank you.
No, Thais are actually, the Thailand side is actually not that bad, particularly the women. They're quite strong.
Yeah. Oh no, I know of the national teams, but then what about the general public, like people of the general community? Do they have a strong cricketing culture as well?
Not at all. There are just one or two clubs, and Chiang Mai in particular, where they've had a very active youth program, and they've got a lot of locals involved. But I actually represented Thailand once before I left. I was there for 4 years, and we had two Thais then who were very good players as the captain and vice captain, but they'd been to school in Australia, so that wasn't really fair.
Well, thank you. But yeah, I do know of the national teams. Yes, thank you.
Okay, fine. I have unraveled the mystery of the Zoom user. It happens to be Alpha, who's disguised. Alpha, your chance to ask the question. Alpha, the Zoom user. He's complaining in the chat, saying that he doesn't get a chance, but I give several chances because he's appearing as Zoom user and he's not here now. Okay, let's go back to then Udi. Is he here?
Hi, Rochana. So, few other questions. Just to echo Mahendra's point earlier, I felt that during the conflict and the war, cricket was one of the most important unifying factor for all Sri Lankan. Even now, I think there are plans to have just coming back to my original questions. So you mentioned about the established Sri Lankan cricketers coming and influencing English cricket, but we are at a time where the second generation is slowly coming into influence UK cricket, and I'm sure there are many young cricketers coming up, and I'm sure some of them will find their way through to the English team. I mean, Dimitri Mascarens is probably one. It's just a comment. I think only time will tell how that influences. The other thing I want to ask you about cricket tourism. I think that is it may be outside your research, but I think that's another important thing is because many British schools go to Sri Lanka to play school cricket, and not only schools but many other teams also, but particularly schools. I'm sure they might enjoy Sri Lankan exposure. So just another comment. The other one band is a typical Sri Lankan thing, which sometimes we see in big in matches here, particularly when Sri Lanka is playing. I wonder whether the British spectator culture has influenced Sri Lankan cricket at any time. I mean, you see lots of fancy dress parades in UK Test matches. I haven't seen that in Sri Lankan cricket matches in Sri Lanka. I don't know whether you want to comment. Just
I'm not quite sure, Rochana, whether you heard.
No, I did get it. I was just wondering if he has something else to say, or is that it?
Because his question was, or comment was so long that when we come to the end, we forget the start.
No. So I'll start from I'll start with the cricket tourism thing. So I remember Sri Lankan Airlines last year either started or they were planning to start something about, in order to, as a marketing strategy and also to bring in more tourism to Sri Lanka to increase this attractive venture of the school cricket thing. So, to get more tourists, to get more British tourists into the country. So I think, I don't know if it was still in the making of it or if they actually implemented it, but there was this, school tourism thing in their plans. I'm sorry, the third thing that you I think I forgot. What was the third thing?
The other one is the second generation influence on English cricket. I mean, it's too early to say, but many youngsters are coming up, and I'm sure there will be influence on English cricket from the second generation Sri Lankans in time to come.
I really don't know what and also I'm not very much interested in the national teams of these countries. Like I like to see how the general populace interact with cricket, and how people interact with cricket, and what sort of sentiments come in their interaction with cricket. Now when it comes to Sri Lankan national team, of course, with my master's dissertation, I looked into the Sri Lankan national team, but again it was more about the spectatorship. So I looked at anthems and cricket songs that came about, during the various World Cups that we had, and the kind of sentiments they bring out. So that's about that. And then the other thing about fancy dress. So I assume you're talking about the Barmy Army and, elements like that. Actually, so I don't know. I mean, we do have certain elements like that, but I feel like maybe not in the same way as the Barmy Army. But I do know that in the UK, especially during the 1980s and 90s, just like the Caribbean cricketers were sort of viewed at in a derogatory way, British Asians. I don't think the Sri Lankan community was big enough for this, but especially the Indian and Pakistani crowds, English people at the time used to call them hooligans, and used to compare cricket, British Asian cricket fans to football hooligans. So there's that. I mean, but I haven't really seen anything other than the sort of carnival atmosphere that we usually see in cricket, Sri Lankan cricket.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Alpha.
Can you hear me now?
Of course, yes.
Thanks, Ruan, and thank you, Rochana. Brilliant presentation. I just want to make a few comments. Just to start with the kind of the comparison of the systems that work in Sri Lanka, the equivalent to what's going on in England when it comes to selections and getting into the national side. So that back in Sri Lanka, it's the kind of the club setup. So it's just all those clubs in our day. I'm talking about maybe the 70s or 80s. The cricketers came from most of the Colombo clubs, and they had all very English names like Bloomfield Cricket Club, Nondescript Cricket Club, which was NCC, and then BRC, of course, Burger Recreation Club. And then there was, of course, the only thing, I think the SSC was only single cricket club. So that's something to say. And quite a lot of these guys came from there. So, Tenakun came from, I think, SSC, but the rest came from the other clubs. I think Michael Tissera and the captains from that era. And then I also wanted to talk about, the first game, when the official ICC recognition of Sri Lanka as a team was 1982. And the first game was played at the Oval, if I remember correctly. And Pete, I think, captained England against Sri Lanka. And at that time, again, was it the Varnapura era at that time, was the captain, I think, of the Sri Lankan cricket team. So those are things that I just wanted to kind of mention. And again, the fact that most of there's a huge kind of burger representation in our days. So the famous cricketers of in our era, if you remember the Hine brothers, I think it was David and I think Desmond Hine. And then the Reeds, they were Barney and Buddy Reed. Ajanta and folks might be able to say more about that. And there were lots of them. And I just was saying. And also David Dance, you mentioned the name Tissera, Andre Tissera. So Andre Tissera actually is a Trinitian. And he played for Trinity. And that's the guy I think you're talking about in the 70s when I was in school, who captained Trinity. Thanks. I hope that has been useful to add to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was very useful. And I also like to mention that the first Ceylonese cricket club was actually the Malay Cricket Club in 1872. And it's only after that that the Sinhalese Cricket Club and all the other clubs were formed. And also what you mentioned about burger influence on the game in Sri Lanka. So it's very, very interesting, yes, because at first it was the English settlers, the planters who played cricket, but then the burghers started playing cricket, and then the burghers were being heavily sidelined because they were burgher and not purely European. So then there came about a nationalism from within them. So what we see in those early stages is the Ceylonese nationalism meant the burgher nationalism, and then after that you had the Sinhala Buddhist nationalism come in. So it's very interesting to see how these centers and peripheries keep changing all the time. So just wanted to add to that, because again, when Ceylonese nationalism came about, then afterwards it was the same people who called Sinhala Buddhist people Sarang Johnnies. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for Alpha. You mentioned about Andre Tissera. I haven't come across that name before.
He is Michael Tissera's nephew.
All right. So is that Andre the French pronunciation of Henry?
Yeah. Andre and Jan Tissera.
Jan. 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 right?
Zayn was Jan,
Yes.
Teixeira, and Andre was the brother, the two brothers. So I think they captained Trinity in the late, I think 73, 74, I think, when I was in school. Yeah, I'm talking. Yeah.
Wow, what a family,
Teixeira.
because Jan is the Dutch
Yeah.
pronunciation
Yeah.
and Andre is the French pronunciation. Why are they using
Yeah.
all sorts of different names?
Yeah, I really don't know. You'll have to ask the Teixeiras that question. But I was saying that Teixeira they're burgers, right? So that was that crop of burger cricketers who kind of fed the national team. I was talking about the Heinz, and they dominated. Then of course came the Opathas, and very few. I mean, predominantly. And then of course they have a Sinhalese players, and I'm talking about quite a lot of them. But the kind of the clubs were in the clubs. I think that the burger community held sway, and of course that comes from kind of Dutch and British and kind of the heritage of all these clubs, isn't it? That's a point I was trying to make. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mahendra.
I want to ask Rochana a question which is related, but one of the most popular sports in England is football. I know football is played in Sri Lanka, but it's never had the same appeal that cricket has. And certainly, I don't know of any professional footballers in this country, in England, who had come from Sri Lankan roots or background. So have you any views on why cricket is so dominant compared to football, both being very popular games of English origin, if you like?
Okay, that's a very good question. So, so in India, I know that football is very popular. I think even before cricket, football had been the grassroots game that anyone can play, everyone can play. And I think to still date in India and Pakistan, it's quite, it has pervaded general mainstream society. So I don't really know why it hasn't pervaded Sri Lankan society the same way. But with regard to our national team, so I think in 2023 we were banned from FIFA. I think I don't know if the ban has been lifted, but at least in 2023 we were banned. But then we are taking, like, the Sri Lankan football team has this new, I don't know how new it is, but they are recruiting people with dual citizenship. So we have a lot of players now coming in from Sweden, Germany, Australia, second generation, third generation. Some of them are only like quarter Sri Lankan, but they have Sri Lankan citizenship. So they're coming into play football in Sri Lanka. And I just saw a video about 2 days ago of this football analyst talking about how Sri Lankan football will actually rise in the coming years simply because we are taking dual citizens. And these are people from very good football playing countries, and that we might actually go up the ranks. So those are my views on it. But I personally haven't watched a Sri Lankan football match at all. So I don't know. Yes.
Just on that, Rochana, there's I'm really going back to now 70s and so on. If you look at England and Sri Lanka those days, if you look at the so-called good public schools, they play cricket and rugby, not football. If you play football, you are from a different class. You take pride in saying, "Oh, I play cricket and rugby. I don't play football." But in Sri Lanka also there was that at an early stage. I remember people saying, "If you play football, you're not quite right. You're not in the right social bracket." I'm sure that's all gone now. But do you see have you heard anything like that from other people?
So I don't even know. So I'm speaking about like state schools. We actually don't have football teams, I think, because what you hear of it is the usual cricket, rugby, hockey, volleyball, and all of these other sports, but actually not football. But there was a film a few years ago. Jayalat Manoratna acted in it. It's called Goal. I haven't watched it, but it is about football in this rural schools. So I wonder if it's I don't really see football being played in these rural schools either, but maybe that has something. I mean, I haven't watched the film, so I don't really know what it is about. It might be just an isolated event about the school playing football, but I don't know.
What do others think? Anybody in the audience? I mean, there was definitely a class element those days. If you're from a decent school, you play rugby. You don't play football. You play cricket and rugby.
Yes, Mahendra, I agree with you in that during my time, I went to schools that were thought to be, not the classy type. And those schools did pretty well in football. In fact, you might remember, I don't know whether you were a cinema goer of your time, there was Colombo Hardeo. That was one of the films. I think it was released in the late 60s, 70s. And Piedasa Pereira, who was one of the cast in that film, was the vice captain. He went to St. Michael's, Polwatta, a school that was unknown to the rest of the world, let alone Sri Lankans. And there were good players who came from such schools, but they did not belong to the class. And that is why I think football did not take up. There were one or two. Peter Ranasinghe was in the Air Force. He captained Sri Lanka when Piedasa Pereira was playing. But Peter came from, I think, a renowned school. I can't remember whether he went to Royal or another school. But at the time, Royal was not playing football at all. There was no team. In fact, when I went to school, St. Thomas's, Royal, Wesley played football, but St. Thomas's did not. I don't know whether Trinity did. So football was not the classic game either. And that is the reason why it didn't take up.
Thank you.
But in my time, I can remember at St. Thomas's, I can't remember a formal football team, but we used to play football. And most of us couldn't afford a proper football, so we used to use a rubber ball to play football. I think everybody knows that in Arya school, Arya was used as the ball, I think, the football. Isn't it? Arya became silent. Okay.
I'm also wondering, I feel like some international schools in Sri Lanka might play football. And I don't think football has that same classist association at the moment in Sri Lanka. Like, if you're like, in England as well, it's a working class game. And, I don't think that perception of football exists in Sri Lanka anymore. But I feel like some international schools might have football. But I can check and see.
I can't see any more hands raised, but I have a question for you, Rochana. And yes, I need to make clarifications of your name first. It's not Rochana, it's Rochana. Some people still mispronounce it. Knowing your fastidiousness in pronunciation, I noticed that you pronounce Ceylonese. I was brought up in saying Ceylonese. What is the correct pronunciation according to you, or are both acceptable?
I wasn't really conscious of how I thought I said
No, maybe you said Ceylonese, but I like that. I like that pronunciation, but I was brought up by saying Ceylonese. I don't know why, but that's how we have been taught. But I thought Ceylon should become Ceylonese, whereas we are saying Ceylonese. Just check on it.
Ruwan,
I wasn't very conscious of what I was saying.
Sorry, Arya, yes.
Yeah, Ruwan, if you listen to the BBC broadcasters, most of them would refer to as Ceylonese.
Silo or Silla?
Not Silla, Silo.
Silo, okay.
Yeah. It's worth having a look at it if you can go into the archives.
Because Rochana works for the OED, so I think it's her job to clarify these issues for us. Right. I know
Yamang Silo.
There were a few cricketers like Punchi, who didn't open their mouths. Punchi is at the moment in Sri Lanka. Maybe he's fallen asleep by now. I don't know. He's gone, is he? Ajay, you want to say anything about SLMDA cricket or any anecdotes to share?
The only thing I want to comment is that it was very brave of Rochana, not being a cricketer, to take on this subject to a cricket man community. You did very well, Rochana. Thank you very much. You taught us a few things. And all the best with your research and your doctorate. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right. In the absence of any further questions, shall we all show our faces, mugs, whatever you want to call it, put on the videos? Because I want to thank Rochana. Once again, Rochana, you did well. You did a very interesting presentation. I think there were about 46 people participating. And thank you very much, Rochana. And from all of us at SLLS, we would be thanking you in our usual way. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's the end of our session. Thank you very much.